BRUCAST is back, baby.
This BRUCAST episode is brought to you by the BRUCAST Store. Explore a store filled with awesome goodies from hoodies to t-shirts to mugs. We've got you covered. Stay in style with BRUCAST. Embrace the shock, set the trend. Visit now brew-cast.com/store. Link below.
Back with the fire, can't you see the flames? From Deutschland steps comes the BRUCAST name. Voices like thunder breaking all the chains. Unleash the fury like a runaway train.
Alright, hi everyone, welcome back to another BRUCAST episode. If it's your first time watching the show, make sure to like and subscribe. If you're listening to Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please rate the show 5 stars. This will ensure that the podcast recommends to even more people and allow me to keep doing what I love. BRUCAST also on Instagram, X, and TikTok, where I upload shorts with the highlights of the show. So follow now, BRUCAST on Instagram, X, and TikTok. Links in the description below.
Back here we thrive, we survive.
Hey there, BRUCAST fans! Happy New Year! That's right, that's the first episode of the year. And so welcome back to everyone. And as you know, we have a giveaway this month. Yeah, it's happening. We did one of those already last year. It was a huge success. We're doing it again. And at the end of this month, January 2025, we're gonna give away one of those beautiful, sexy, wonderful caps. All you have to do is subscribe. Subscribe to our channel and you might win this awesome cap. As I mentioned, the winner gonna be announced at the end of this month, so stay tuned. All right, so we have our guest, the first guest of the year. His name is David Auge. I was not previously reading the introductions. I'm gonna bring it back. I think it's a great way to start, so here we come. David Auge is an author and environmental philosopher. He uses honeybees and desert locusts to review powerful lessons about sustainability. His book, Man's Search for Sustainability, explores how these insects offer insights into creating sustainable societies. All right, David, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Brew. Thanks a lot for the invitation and the opportunity to be here.
Well, man, thank you so much for being here. It's an honor. I'm eager to get to know you, get to know your work. I saw that you are all about sustainability and bees. Last year, I went into this bee whole, how they call it in English? I forgot. Like, you just get immersed into the world and learn all about it. And man, it's interesting.
Oh, about beekeeping and the
Yeah,
responsibilities of a beekeeper? Yeah.
exactly. So, I need to ask you, how did you got into this world?
Well, perhaps a best way to tell you how I got into it is the fact that I am a environmental philosopher, but I'm an environmental engineer. And what I've been doing for about the last 3 decades is working on the best way to take the very concept of sustainability and bring it to the attention of the next generation. So my efforts have usually been with trying to communicate, trying to bring the ideas to the forefront. I've dealt with this for, like I mentioned, over 30 years in training, in explanations at conferences. All of those that I've found to be the most effective have to deal with bringing to someone a story about something that is sustainable so that they can grasp the idea themselves and move forward with it. Brew, I understand the word sustainability to be a normative term, something that's descriptive and not prescriptive. So the concept here, Brew, is the fact that something can be more or less beautiful. That's a normative term, beauty. Something can be more or less sustainable. Most of society is confused with the junk promoted to answer a question: what is sustainable and why be sustainable? My approach is to address the philosophical question about sustainability. I've worked in this discipline, like I mentioned, for years, and mostly it's the telling of stories that I believe bring to the forefront in people's minds why this is an issue that they should be concerned with.
All right, so you tell stories to people in order to make them care about the environment.
Care about the environment, or to grasp the idea of sustainability, to grasp the idea of why be sustainable about anything? The title itself, why man's search for sustainability, is an attempt by each of us to try and say, what are we going to sustain? What are we going to move forward to hold on to for the next generation?
All right. So when you say sustainability, the first thing that comes to my mind is recycling. That's what we're talking about?
No, we're talking about more than just that. We're talking about the very concept of something that can see itself into the next generation with a purpose, with an understanding. Let me give you a story, and I'll
Yeah.
start with that. Brew, when I was in Houston, Texas, I worked there for a number of years in the period right after 9/11. Here in the United States, 9/11 was a rather significant event that was making many people think about what's going to happen next. As background, Brew, my training was through the United States Military Academy at West Point. So we have West Point societies scattered throughout the United States that meet on a monthly basis. And we would bring to the forefront those individuals that were experts in particular military concerns to the United States at the time. Of course, in 9/11, in November of that year, the guest we brought to the table was an individual who was an expert in Middle Eastern affairs. He had lived for years in Afghanistan, Iraq, around Iran. He could bring to the table information that many of us were not completely aware of. So during that brief 1 hour presentation, I had a chance to hear his summation, if you would, of why this particular event, why this particular conflict was going to be different than anything that we had confronted in the past. And he said in his presentation that it can be boiled down into two words. And he said those two words are, it's history. And he said those words kind of give you a synopsis of the conflict that you're going to face. It's history in the mind of someone in the West, whether in Germany, France, England, United States, Spain. Its history routinely means it's irrelevant. It's not a thing of great concern because it's something that's past. It's not something to bring to the table. But he said in a Middle Eastern understanding, its history means the exact opposite. It means it is relevant. It is something to be understood based upon the fact that you now have a story from the past to the present, going into the future, that has to be connected so that you can grasp the actions to take and then when to take them. I left that particular meeting just thinking, I think he's got a good point, because our Western understanding of so much of what's happening around us misses the fact of that larger picture. And to be sustainable, it requires a understanding that its history means it is relevant.
All right. So by studying history, you are able to predict the future and be more sustainable. That's the point.
Well, history comes to play, but it's more of a philosophical discussion.
Okay.
You may never have heard of Memesis and Poiesis, but let me kind of explain this to you from a philosophical standpoint. Put simply, these terms, Memesis and Poiesis, refer to two different ways of thinking about the world. A mimetic view regards the world as having a given order and a given meaning, and thus sees human beings as required to discover that meaning and then conform themselves to it. Poiesis, once again from a philosophical standpoint, is a contrasting way. It says that the world we live in is merely a bunch of raw materials, out of which meaning and purpose are created by each individual. If you look at sustainability from one, you'll say, well, then if we're to find meaning and purpose from understanding the larger picture of which we fit into, you have a different perspective, almost like its history is relevant, as opposed to the Poiesis point of view, which says, no, this is just a bunch of raw material. We can make it this generation this way, next generation another way. It's more just grasping and holding those basic raw materials that has any meaning. I believe that we fail to see the mimetic effort in understanding this discussion of sustainability by ignoring the greater picture of things that are around us. And I find those in communities that are successful. And that's why I bring to the table two insect communities. And Brew, those are, of course, as you already mentioned, the honeybee and the desert locust. Things we can learn from each of those.
All right. Um, so that's very much a cultural thing, right? Before we dive into the insects, I wanted to talk about the human aspect because I would imagine that depending on the culture, they value like the past or not. I know that, for example, in Japan, they are very respectful of old people and old temples, and but at the same time, whenever the old houses are not valued at all. And here in the West is I don't want to say it's the opposite because that sounds harsh, but a little bit is like it is a little bit. People don't tend to treat old people that respectfully, and that houses, the older they are, the more expensive they are. So I don't know where I'm going with that, but my point is, I think it's very cultural based, right?
Well, it's cultural based at the current time. You're correct. It's we found ourselves into a situation in the West by looking at things from more of a poetic point of view. We have downgraded the importance of the lessons of the past, downgraded the importance of what we can learn from nature, and as a result, we're in a kind of a frenzy of trying to work on raw materials, which most people say, "Oh, that's what it is." We're just worried about raw materials when we say the word sustainability. And I think that's where we lose something in this discussion.
All right, interesting. I just wanted to mention one more thing. I'm sorry, because I was watching this documentary the other day about New York, and I think about 100 years ago, New York was like they were building so many beautiful and sophisticated buildings, but then there would be a new one that they would consider more modern. They just destroy the previous one and they would build a new one with this more modern architecture. And at the time, they were all about innovation. And just a few apparently there was like this beautiful train station that was completely demolished. You know what I'm talking about?
I think I understand the concept.
Yeah,
From an architect who looks at the ground and says, "Oh, we'll just make something," without looking at the greater extent of
exactly.
what
Yeah,
we might have had in the past.
yeah, yeah. All right, I just want to mention that because yeah, go on. I'm sorry.
Oh no, no. But what you bring to the table is something
Mm,
that if you ever heard of LEEDs, LEED stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental
yeah.
Design. It's an architectural standard that attempts to get what you're talking about
Ah,
to the table to say, let's look at a longer life of this building once constructed, a life that could be, hundreds of years, maybe even beyond that, in what we put on the table, as opposed to
mm,
just a short period of time. How can we structure it? How can we shape it? What kind of innovations put into place will allow it to last longer than, say, just something that's going to be made out of wood and be placed in there for a very temporary period of time. But yeah, you're right, Brew. That would be the type of discussion when you're looking at sustainability you would want to bring to the table.
I see. Okay. And what we can learn from the honeybees.
Well, let me go to these are two extremes,
Okay.
the honeybees and the desert locusts. I chose these two type of insects because honeybees are usually the insect that most people say represents the perfect and most ideal society.
Really?
They're balanced, they're structured. Yeah, they in the United States we have uh, emblems which are represented different states throughout this country. We have 26 different states that have chosen the honeybee as their state insect. They recognize it for being industrious. It's a good example of just how to get the greatest benefit of the resources provided. The state of Utah, for example, has put a honey bee on the very center of their flag for the state. So people have elevated that insect to be the perfect example of a sustainable society. On the other end of the spectrum, Brew, is the desert locust. And you may not be aware of this, but I mean, even in the Bible, it's the eighth plague. It's the very destruction of society. Desert locusts can explode in number in a very short period of time. If they show up on the horizon or at your national boundary, you're looking at a famine. You're looking at perhaps the total destruction of your society and anything you desire to eat. So most people hate the desert locust and say that's the example of the most unsustainable of societies, whereas the honeybee is the most sustainable. Many people then would say, well, let's tell you all the lessons about honeybee that are right and all the lessons about the desert locust that are wrong, and then we'll just wash our hands of it and be done with it.
Wait a second, isn't desert locust like the type of grasshopper?
Well, actually, that's a good point. See, a desert locust in 1920 was discovered to be a grasshopper that had a phase change, and it was actually Boris Urey, who was a Russian entomologist, who brought to the table that this desert locust was actually just a grasshopper who had been placed in a very, very stressful situation, resulting in the morphing of this particular grasshopper into something that societies couldn't handle. Because it came in such large number, it changed its practices, and pretty much it destroyed everything in sight.
All right, so A Bug's Life had got something right. Remember this Pixar movie? It was
Yeah.
like the ants. Oh, but I'm sorry, it doesn't make any sense. We're talking about bees. Forget what I said. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the desert locust in this morphing from a grasshopper, which you just mentioned, into a desert locust, goes through a period of 5 changes. These changes will change its coloring, it'll change its operation, it'll change its brain size. The brain of a desert locust is 30% larger than its comparable grasshopper counterpart. It'll actually start to change its behavior so it's gregarious as opposed to solitary. If you find a grasshopper, they're usually green, they're at night, they're munching on some type of lettuce or some type of grass in a garden area. When you find a locust, they have decided to gang up, if you would. They decided to move as a large group. They've decided to descend upon the countryside en masse. They even, in color change, they've decided to change their color from a green to a yellow with, in many cases, black spots, which signals to the predators, birds and other things, that this is something different than what they were chewing on last week. Something that in its growth has become almost overwhelmingly powerful. Now, from a human standpoint, we're like, well, that's obviously not a society we want to be around, because the result is they destroy our society. They consume everything that we have that we would like to have as, food or farm implements and the like. But the concept here is that, yeah, they do that, but that society by itself has some beneficial examples of a society that exists. See, Brew, the situation is that in order to quell the overwhelming power of a desert locust swarm, it's necessary for an international United Nations group to come together, because desert locusts have no respect of national boundaries. If you want to deal in Northern Africa with a group of 5, 10, maybe even 50 billion locusts coming across the border at you, you had better have the material in place to be able to stop them before they get to a point where, I'm sorry, your economy has now been decimated, your country is. But we can learn from them. See, there's a growth within the desert locust that occurs, for example, because of stress. My book talks about stress, work allocation, decision-making, communication, maintaining a balance and attention within society. Let's start with stress. A desert locust under stress, that is first finding itself in a very rich environment of which it's been able to consume and grow and strengthen its numbers, is then found to be suppressed when those own resources start to shrink. For example, if it was all of a sudden in a very luscious garden, and then without rain for a period of time, that luscious garden became less and less luscious, became more and more of a desert themselves. These grasshoppers will find themselves rubbing up against each other. They'll find themselves in the need of having more insects, more grasshoppers, more locusts as they're starting to turn into that, than is available to be fed. This prompts a stress change, an environmental stressor that allows them to grow. It allows them to increase in number, in strength. They begin to congregate closely. And as these morphine changes happen in their body, their brain increases inside, they become stronger. Their very practices begin to change. So, yeah, and this is an insect that most people say, well, we need to destroy it. Now, from a human standpoint, we're not going to compete with the locust for the limited resources we have here. But as a society, that stress has actually been to their benefit.
That's
Now, on
so
the opposite end,
interesting. Go ahead.
yeah, okay, on the opposite end of the spectrum, you would have honeybees having to deal with stress. Now, honeybees are extremely orderly. Uh, there's one queen. If you went through some beekeeping training, you know that the entire population is pretty much worker bees, a queen with a very small number of drones. The queen is female,
Yeah.
the workers are female, the drones are male. The drones are less than 0.1% of the entire population. They're able to handle stress, whether it's being attacked by a bear who's found their honeycomb and has decided to take it out, or the weather situation. They handle the stress that's placed upon that community through order. They maintain a strict hierarchy. There's only one queen within the hive. There's a series of jobs that are given, and over the 6-week length of time that worker bees live, they'll transfer those jobs from one to the next. They, have unfortunately a tendency to collapse if that is almost commit suicide if the stress becomes overwhelming. You might have heard of the colony collapse disorder. One of the concerns about beehives is that there's been so many stressors placed upon them that eventually they just kind of dissolve into not a society at all. Stress is handled by honeybees with order, where stress is handled by locusts with growth. And we can learn something from both of those societies as humans and not get into, we have to stop this. We're only talking about resources. No, we're talking about an entire society, about moving forward in our own existence from having learned how to manage stress from these two communities.
So which one's the better? The best?
Well,
It depends on the person and the society, right? The culture.
not quite.
No?
Not quite. It depends on our ability to get a lesson from what we see.
Okay.
That's the mimetic point of view. There's a strength where stress actually helps us to grow. There's also stress where order is needed. And as we learn from these things, we'll see strengths from both communities.
Man, it's funny. My mind keeps going back to Japan. I think they have a word for work to death. You work so much that you die. It's karoshi. Yeah, it's like the bees, right? Like it's just they are. I think they're also very hierarchical. They have so I'm concluding here that Japanese are bees, basically. No, but it's funny. So they do that, and all right. And so there's this option, of course, and there's the other one that is from the locusts, that are they if they're in like their comfort zone, they produce more babies in order for their numbers to grow. So their resources are scarce, therefore they have more stress and they have like a push towards evolution and progress and some that did I got it right?
Well, you did, but you used the word comfort zone.
Oh.
One of the things about these two insects is that locusts don't like a comfort zone.
Oh.
And it's the stress that makes them grow. I mean, if you had to say their comfort zone is to have unlimited amount of food and have unlimited growth, most of the time they're either growing and procreating, so it's kind of have sex and eat food, it seems to be their drive. But it's actually the stress that helps them to continue to move forward in that area. So, something that we don't, as humans, see a benefit from. And we would go to, well, that's going to drive you nuts. That's eventually going to drive you to the situation of the bees. But there still is a growth there. And that brew is where you're trying to learn from both communities as opposed to saying, well, let's just make it black and white. This is good. This is bad. All right. What's the next lesson? No, there's something from both. It's looking closely at what we have here. Can I tell you another story?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, and you may be aware of this book, you may not, but there's a book that's called Man's Search for Meaning. I quote it frequently in the book. It's by a guy named Viktor Frankl. Are you familiar with his name or
No,
his?
no, I'm not.
Okay, Viktor Frankl was an Austrian neurologist and psychologist. He founded a school called logotherapy. It was called kind of like the third Viennese school of psychology following Freud and Adler. Logotherapy was developed from his personal experiences in Theresienstadt, as well as Auschwitz and Kaufering and Turkheim. So, as background, what he discovered, because he was in the infirmary of these particular concentration camps in World War II, was that there was a drive pushing people to continue their life. They were in a concentration camp whose extermination was part of the focus here. These situations allowed him as a neurologist and a psychologist to say, why would someone continue to want to live one more day? What was the driver inside of these individuals? So in his book, which he wrote about, I don't know, it was within about 3 months of his release in 1945, he said of the people that were surviving in those infirmaries, because of their own will to live, they did so for 3 reasons. The first reason is because they had someone they just had to embrace, some person out there who, after this particular event, they wanted to be with. It was the love of a person. The second one was a drive to produce something. They were a great artist, or they were a great musician, or they were a great author or something, and they just had to get out of them what they felt they were here to do, some exercise of their effort. And the third one, which is pretty much the focus of his book, Man's Search for Meaning, was the fact that there was something in them that was saying, there's a bigger picture out here that I'm a part of. I don't know what it is, but I need to find it. I need to explore it. I need to continue to dig at it so that I can see the greater picture of the whole effort of why this is what it is. That's where sustainability becomes normative, because it's not just a collection of raw materials. It's a collection of the very purpose of why we are wanting to sustain anything. His thing, that is, Viktor Frankl, was these people, for some reason, are sustaining their existence for one more day because there's a mystery out there that they're still asking why I need to be here and what I need to be doing in it.
Wow, you just gave me a completely new meaning of the word sustainability. So before, when we started our conversation about 28 minutes ago, I was like, sustainability is recycling. No, it's about sustaining yourself. It's about maintaining you alive, right? It's more than just recycling. Now I understand it. That's beautiful. And so they would stay alive. Those people that were in concentration camps, they would stay alive because either they wanted to meet someone, see a person that they loved and care about, or they have like a certain type of mission. They wanted to have a music or a painting that they needed to put out, or the third and last option is they understood there was a bigger picture that they were part of and they needed to understand. Did I got it correct? Right. Wow.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. And that's what Viktor Frankl was trying to do. And one of the reasons why I chose the title Man's Search for Sustainability, because we're pretty much doing the same thing if we go and see it's not just a collection of raw material. Because for us to live and die because we've got so much raw material at our beck and call is a pretty weak reason to live and die. You've collected enough or you've minimized your impact on enough. There's a bigger reason out there. It's the poietic versus memetic view. You're trying to mimic those societies that lasted and continue to last, and looking further into that particular instruction.
Hmm. Wow, that's amazing. Like I'm questioning myself right now, like why I'm living. Do I have a music that I want to produce, or what's the big picture? That's so. I want to ask you, David. Like, did you take those lessons and you apply to your life as well?
Well, that's one of the reasons for the book is to
Mm.
do that. At the
Oh.
beginning of each chapter in the book, you'll see a certain short story about things that have happened in my own existence, where
Oh.
I had to bring to the table, the handling of stress or work or communication, and how those kind of refocused my own experiences to go forward. For example, Brew, I have a son. Um, he's now in his teen years, but when he was 3 years old, he was diagnosed with childhood leukemia. And if you're familiar with childhood leukemia, um, it's or it used to be in the past a death sentence up until about the 1960s. Anybody diagnosed with childhood leukemia, uh, about only 5 to 10% lived. Most passed. My son was in that situation. My wife and I were shocked. We were at the hospital with a doctor who said, yes, your child is going to begin a series of chemotherapy that's going to last 3 to 4 years. And 3 to 4 years, he will be bald. He will have extremely low immune system. And as the doctor was looking at us, the doctor said, how are you doing with this? And of course, we said, well, how are we doing with this? I mean, it's our son who's got leukemia. Our concern has got to be secondary to his. And the doctor, with the social worker, said, no, you've got to look at who you are through this, because most of the parents whose children go through this event for the next 3 to 4 years, the parade to and back and forth from the hospital, um, most of them, about 60%, are going to get divorced and 70% are going to go bankrupt.
What?
Your, yeah, your entire future is going to be destroyed because of this. And my wife and I kind of locked arms. We sold everything that we thought was purchased on credit or something like that, and started to go through this very, very slowly, communicating, maintaining a balance through this effort. Um, and that's kind of an experience I had to do about, are we going to sustain our marriage? Are we going to sustain our family? Or is this entire thing going to just explode on us because of our unwillingness to really confront the situation we now have? And I can tell you that my son did make it through. Uh, he took about 4.5 years of treatment, but he did survive, and he's now 19 years old. So, anyway, that's what I do. I'm weaving some of these things in that happen in my own life that make me look like you just mentioned, Brew. What do I really want to sustain? What do I really, and why am I really here? Back to Viktor Frankl. Is the person, or is there a larger story here? Let me explore those aspects.
Wow, that's wonderful. And it just brings like a sense of self-awareness to like yourself. You understand yourself better. Like I know from psychology, the more like let's take a trauma, for example, or like a very deep issue that you have, like you might be, for example, you might have a lot of anxiety or might be aggressive, and those are all related to your trauma, but you don't know about it, you're just acting it out like unconsciously. And the thing is, I know from psychology and therapy, like the more you understand the trauma and those deep seat issues, um just the fact you understand them, like it releases you from whatever effects they were causing. It gives you control basically over
Right.
your life. And what we were talking about, like about finding sustainability and meaning, I would assume does the same. Brings control and gives you some gives you some sort of control over your own life and over your own destiny. That's beautiful. I think more everyone needs to seek that. And I don't think like I don't want to talk about people, but I feel like in general most people just don't think very deeply about it. I would say like they know they are lost, not everyone, but and they just don't know what to do, and this is like a step, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what it is. It's just a step to say, let's look a little differently than our normal Western approach to say this is just a bunch of raw materials. No, there's something deeper here. There's something deeper in it that we need to look at than that. And I guess it starts to put flesh on the bones of what we're trying to understand for sustainability.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Like I had no idea we were going this direction, but I'm loving it. um all right. So we touched the honeybee and locust story. We also touched on the search for meaning, the man searching for meaning story. Do you have more story? I want more stories.
Well, let's see. Let's talk about the interesting stories about let's see, making decisions.
Make decisions.
That's a good part. Yeah, making decisions within the desert locust and the honeybee community. Within the desert locust, there's really not a leader.
Really?
They march forward almost as if they're an army, and they fly in the same situation. Their increase in their brain size actually gives them some interesting abilities to navigate and not run into each other. That particular effort, though, allows there to be a movement forward through that. Now, from a human standpoint, we see a certain strength when the efforts to go forward are motivated more by, let's say, a desire as opposed to a leader. There's a strength from as you can remember, the desire of a democracy. Once the people of that democracy decide to move in a same direction, they're rather strong, as opposed to if there's a particular structured area like a leader. Now that would be in contrast with making decisions from bees. Now bees do a good job of making decisions, but the strength usually has to be propped up through other means. But let me first, let me stop for just a second. There is a certain amount of chaos in the decision making that you see of the desert locusts. In my book, I talk about what's called the seeking for the center. They've had cameras that'll follow desert locusts where they're always trying to figure out how are they making a decision to go to the north or to the south or to the east or to the west. There seems to be within this massive locusts a continual flying toward the center until a decision actually is made for them to move to wherever that next location is. And they can fly 70, 80, 90, 100 miles in a single day. So they've got a tremendous amount of ability to move in that direction. But there's a chaotic way of which they're learning, communicating, discerning where they're going to go from each other, minus a leader. Now, in contrast, you've got decisions being made by bees. Now, a honeybee has a queen. The queen has pheromones. She has a physical presence within the comb, within the hive, that lasts for between 2 to 5 years. Every other bee in that community is going to be there for about 6 weeks, maybe 7 weeks. But she is going to be a stabilizing force upon which decisions will be made, the health will be made. Actually, many of the decisions that are being made are because of her health. It's almost like everybody's going, how's the queen? Is the queen okay? Is the queen okay? How's the queen? That particular thing allows the decisions of her central portion of the community to be there. But let's say, and this is, I found fascinating, Brew, let's say that they have to become 2 hives. Okay. And that's the way they do it. One hive has to become 2 hives because that's the only way they're going to stabilize and expand their community. The queen will decide, based upon the volume of space that they currently occupy, that it's just not enough for this upcoming season. She'll take approximately 60% of the beehive population and herself, and they'll move outside of the hive onto a branch, onto a tree. That relocation allows the bees who have just consumed a whole bunch, about 24 to 48 hours, maybe 72, to then make a decision on where they're going to go next. Now, this is where bees are fascinating, because what will happen is bees communicate with one another, not only with pheromones, but also with what's called the bee dance. Have you heard about that?
Yeah. That's how they indicate where to find pollen, right?
Exactly. Where to find pollen, where to find nectar, where to find those things. Well, they actually can use that dance also to find a new home. So now you have this ball of bees that are hanging. Most people call them a swarm. They're hanging from a branch somewhere, um, usually within 100 yards of the first home that they started at. Some of those forager bees will now become scouts, a small percentage of them, and they will start to look not for a new honey source, not for a new pollen source or nectar. They'll start to look for a new home. They'll look for the location of it, how high in the air it is, just how is it damp, is it got a southern facing. They'll then come back to the hive and continue a dance on the outside of the existing ball of bees to demonstrate their concern of that this what they just found is better than what someone else is. And actually the intensity of the dance will be a debate, if you would, of that entire ball of bees, of what particular finding was the best. And over that 24 to 48, 72 hours, the what's called leakage of information will reduce the dancing of those people that have found, come back and said, yeah, this is the best home. This is the best one. And the beehive, or the swarm that's now hanging from this tree with the queen in the center, will fly en masse to that new home. They've made a decision based upon a quorum. They've done this by dancing. They've been able to debate this issue so that with the leakage of information, they have made pretty much a good decision, more than 70% chance of success in where they went to. What can we learn from it as humans? Well, the leakage of information, Brew, is probably the biggest part. Most of us want to die, because we believe so strongly in the decision we've made.
Oh, I
The
thought it was
bees,
about dancing. I thought we need to dance more.
yeah, yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe we can dance ourselves into that generation. But what comes is that this leakage of information allows these bees to say, okay, it was good, but this bee over here is dancing a lot harder and a lot more uh, deliberately than I am. There must be something greater there than what I have. And eventually the quorum is made, the decision, and they fly. And it's a fascinating way to watch, once again, a decision being made with about 30,000 insects or so that are hanging in this ball to a new home within 3 days.
Wow. Yeah, it's fascinating. Fascinating. Like and like as I mentioned, like last year I did not took a beekeeping course or lessons, anything like that. But man, I watched so many YouTube videos. Like we just touched the surface right now. Like the swarming, like the different types of classes. Is like it's we mentioned at the beginning. It's like it's a perfect society because it's very interesting. There's so much stuff going on, and they still produce and they also produce honey, right? With all of this effort, all of those things that they do, and then there's your honey, and you can do so much things with honey. You can like, of course, eat it. You can do like candles with the wax, like such fascinating, interesting little creatures. And what is the most striking for me about everything that we've been talking so far? Like we just talked about like two insects, right? We talked about bees, and we talked about the locusts, locusts, right? I pronounced it correct. And like,
Right.
look how much lessons we took, sustainable lessons from them. I'm sure we can do the same type of mental exercise with several other animals. Like I last year I read this book, The 12 Rules from for Life, from Jordan Peterson. Are you
Okay.
familiar with that book?
Oh, yes, I am.
Yeah. Did you remember? I think the first chapter they talk about lobsters. Like there's this whole
Yeah.
internet. They love to make fun of it. How was it again? Like lobsters in order to grow, they need to break their shell. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the instar of a locust is the same way. They have five
Really?
instars within the locust. Yeah, the exoskeleton has to expand in order for the interior to grow. Yeah, and lobsters have what uh, no limit to the size of which they can eventually get to. So they've shown absolutely monstrously size locusts. I'm sorry, lobsters. You got me now.
Yeah, that's incredible. I think like there was more stuff. I think there was like the male dominant lobster. I don't remember. It's been a while since I read it. But I don't know anymore. But I'm sure we can keep going. Like I don't know. I don't know. Like the second thing that comes to my head is like uh um penguins and how they gather together on winter to warm themselves up. I don't know what's the lesson there, but it's just something that I thought about right now.
Right. Yeah, I just did it with these two insects, but yes, you're very right. There could be a number of other things that we learn from, and then we apply. There's an observation, interpretation, application step where you observe, and then you can interpret what you've observed to see the lessons that are there, and then apply it. And if you can go through all three of those, with in this case, desert locusts and honeybees, observe them, spend some time looking closely, and understanding that you are part of the bigger picture that includes them. So there might be a lesson here, tremendous lesson, that you can observe from that before you then interpret and apply.
Beautiful. Yeah, I think we all should do that. So David, I see in your profile, like you wrote, you have experience raising bees.
That's right. I for the last 5 years, I have beehives here at my house as well
What?
as the place. Well, I shouldn't say in my house. Of course, it's in the yard, in the back there, and I spend time with them routinely, uh, making sure that they're healthy, they're growing. I give away the honey to neighbors and friends. Um, don't do much with the wax. I mean, my wife likes to make wax candles from that particular aspect of their growing.
That's wonderful. Like now everything makes sense why we're talking about it so much. For how long are you a beekeeper?
For the last 5 years. So
Wow.
I'm probably on the more of the novice end of things, but I've learned a great deal from them. And one of the reasons why I even started this book was the fact that I saw so many people disparaging the desert locusts. And I thought, hold it a second.
Mm.
There's things to be learned on both ends of the spectrum.
Oh, I
We
see.
don't.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yin yang, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I the reason I got so interested in bees to begin with, I saw this ad from this hive. It's called the Flow Hive. Uh,
Yeah.
you know it.
Yes. I've seen them where you've been able to make the each and every single cell available to the center frame section, and then you open it up, and the honey will actually
Exactly.
proceed down a yeah.
Do you recommend it?
To,
Have you tried?
I've had some friends do that. They say it's a novel approach, but there's a situation where bees create a lot of propolis, and that seems to be a way to gum up that one device in the center that moves. Propolis is what they use in order to insulate and protect the hive from things moving into it. But it's also somewhat of an issue there. But I've had people successfully use the flow hive.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. For those just listening, well, it's just like you described. It's like honey on a tap. You just switch a
Yeah.
valve and it flows. Like theoretically, it works perfectly, but I'm not sure about that. I know that some people in Berlin they have those in their balconies, and I was like, yeah, why not? I can get it. It just sounds fun. But then there's a swarming. How are you gonna do with the swarm? And
Yeah.
like in the city, what are you gonna do? And then I researched like, and apparently their recommendations like to join a beehive community to give away the swarm, like that's how we call it, the swarm, like the new colony away to other beekeepers. Like, dude, that's so much work. I assume you have like a house and a garden, a lot of space for it, right?
Right. And you try and split the hive yourself in the early spring so that the queen who's making an assessment of what she has as a resource, she goes, oh, I do have a lot of space. And it's less likely she's going to swarm. So you're right.
Oh.
You look at that, you're trying to manage that aspect of it so that you can control it. She's going to want to swarm, but it's going to be based upon some factors that she has assessed within the hive.
Oh, okay. So you can control. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so I'm gonna hit you up later. We're gonna talk about it. So, David, I have two more questions for you. I know the first one is, do you believe in environmental catastrophe in our future? That's something that I wanted to ask you, and then we can talk about your books and your links. But let's start with the environmental catastrophe. Do you see global warming, massive storm surge, starvation happening anytime soon?
One of the things I put that on there to talk about, in the fact that my book doesn't quite go into something like that. It goes into the fact that unlike locusts and honeybees, we don't have a genetic predisposition for one way or the other. We have the ability to change the direction of what things happen and make those decisions. There's a contemplation about both those communities that humans have, and as a result, I believe that there's a lot of hope, especially in hope of people saying, let's look at the opportunities we have here to learn, and not just to very much poo-poo the idea that we're all doomed.
Yeah, I don't know, man, because it's like Corona, you know. I'm optimist. I think humanity will evolve and we're gonna move on to other planets. I'm very optimistic about it, but I also feel like some of those things are kind of random, right?
Mhm.
Like you cannot predict any of them; they just happen, I guess.
Or there's something there. Have you heard of the Bellagio principles for gauging progress towards sustainable development?
No.
Okay, these are efforts, measurements to see in a larger picture the impact that we're talking about.
Oh.
Many times, yeah, it's like what is meant by sustainable development within what we're talking about? Is it the existence and continuation of a community? Is it merely the collection of certain raw materials, which I say no in particular? I mean, that's one of the reasons I've got the book, but to look at it in more of a holistic sense, the economic, the social, the ecological components. Those principles by Bellagio kind of give you a better idea that there's a larger picture here, instead of just saying there'll be some type of monstrous environmental catastrophe and we're all going to die and let's be done with it. Yeah, I'm not a proponent for that. Neither is my book.
Well, Hollywood's like thinks otherwise.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it sells a lot of tickets for a movie like that. Yeah.
Of course. So, David, I would like to thank you so very much for all those insights and to get to know you. It was very interesting. I'd like to ask you, please, where people can find you, where they can find your book.
All right. And maybe you can put it on the screen as well. It's davidaugebooks.com. Books plural. I'm in the process of writing another book, and it'll be on there as well. But David Auge, AUGE, books.com, without a period in between the rest of that. From that website, you can buy the book. You can get a better understanding of what we've talked about here, as well as get a quick summary of the differences, why you can learn something from both bees and honey locusts, or desert locusts. Honey locusts.
Honey looks. All right, beautiful. Thank you so much. Do you have any final remarks? Anything else that you'd like to say?
No, I do thank Brew for your audience. Thanks for listening through all the way to the end, and I hope they get a better understanding of sustainability from this discussion.
I hope so. I did. So thank you so much. All right. Thank you, everyone. It was wonderful conversations, but I need to remind you, please subscribe. We're giving away this beautiful, awesome, sexy cap at the end of the month. All you have to do is subscribe. It's that easy. So don't miss out. Subscribe. That's been it. All right. So happy New Year. Happy New Year, David. It was a pleasure. See you next time.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for hanging out with us today. If it's your first time watching the show, make sure to like and subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please rank the show 5 stars. This will ensure that the podcast is recommended to even more people and allow me to keep doing what I love. Check out now the BRUCAST store, Explore store, filled with awesome goodies from hoodies to t-shirts to mugs. We've got you covered. Stay in style with BRUCAST. Embrace the shock, set the trend. Buy now at brew-cast.com/store. Again, that's brew-cast.com/store. Link on the description below. Be a BRUCAST model and get free stuff. We'd love to see how you and your loved ones enjoy BRUCAST. Snap a picture of yourself, your family, your friends, or even your pets wearing BRUCAST merch, or watching an episode of the show and send it to us and become part of BRUCAST. We will feature you and your pictures at the end of every episode, just like the ones you're seeing on the screen right now. You can upload your pictures at brew-cast.com/contact or tag us on social media. Alright everyone, it has been a pleasure. Thank you so much. And